Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out, despite the weather conditions. I see some familiar faces. Yes, thank you. So this is the last Music and Stream Monday of the year. Please stop me from making see you next year jokes. I would really appreciate if you can keep me in check. As always, I'm Ipeka Soy, and I'm joined today by Asia Garrod Prance from Youth Music and Westley Holdsworth from PRS Foundation. Nice, give it up. Lovely. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you for having us.
So let's start with both of your individual stories. Youth Music and PRS Foundation, two really important organizations in the charities and funding industry with regards to the music industry. So obviously, I want to hear about your organizations and what it is that you do. So if you can just start by explaining your role, maybe how you got there and what interests you the most about your role and what it is that your organization does.
Cool. How I got there, I started off playing in bands, making music. I'm from a place called Ipswich in Suffolk, and I grew up there, playing in pubs and clubs and all that sort of stuff. And then I ended up doing like PR, booking tours, going on tour, helping other people, and sort of figured out how the music world works that way. And then at some point in my life, I had the opportunity to move to New Zealand with someone. So I went there and worked my way up the music industry in New Zealand, from a record store to editing a magazine, and then working in their export office, which most countries have an export office. We don't have one. That's another story. And then I moved back to the UK and got this job actually at PRS Foundation from there. I think the thing I like about it most is that where I come from, and at the time where I come from, there was no support for anything. I didn't even know that things like this existed. And even if I did, I would not know how to apply for something or get any help. So the reason I am here is to help people like my 20-year-old self navigate something they might not understand or know about. So the PRS Foundation is a talent development funder. We have lots of different grant schemes at all different levels, and they're sort of tiered for wherever you may or may not be in your career, and some are for different reasons. Some are open to everyone, some are targeted. And the whole purpose of what we do is to help people level up to a point where they can build a long-term sustainable career in music. So we have things like Women Make Music, which is a grant scheme just for women. We have programs that exist outside of our schemes. One's called Key Change, which is now a global movement for gender equality in the music industry. There's a thing called Power Up, which is for Black music creators and Black professionals in the music industry to help tackle anti-Black racism and all sorts of things like that. My personal role is I'm a grants and programs manager, so I look after the Open Fund for organisations, the Open Fund for music creators, a programme called the Aurum Awards, which I love, which is about women in music technology and sound art, and we fund lots of incredible people through that, and also the International Showcase Fund, which is for attending international showcases all around the world. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really informative.
Wesley's story is a lot more glamorous than mine is. So my background is originally in sort of theatre and live events. So after I graduated at university, I started booking music bands for a small festival down in Wales. And after that, I started working at a community organisation called the Albany in Deptford, working on their music programme. And the reason I joined the world of funding, and ironically, actually, I worked with Westley for 2 years at the PRS Foundation, was what we found when we were at the Albany is we were talking to all these artists and musicians, and they weren't aware that there was all this funding available to them to apply for. And we were running these funding surgeries and saying, like, have you heard of the PRS Foundation? Have you heard of Help Musicians? Have you heard of Youth Music? And the answer would be no, or that's not for me. That's for someone who's in a different genre. It's not quite the right fit for me. And that was astounding because it is for you. It is there for you. And that's why I wanted to move into funding, is to break down that barrier, I think, where there are other art forms that have slightly more experience in applying for funding, are more aware of funding streams. So that's why I went into it. And I did 2 years at the PRS Foundation with Westley. Horrible time. Was a terrible colleague. Hated working with him. And then I joined Youth Music at the beginning of this year. So Youth Music is, again, a charitable funder. And the organisation is set up because we believe that every child and young person should have the opportunity to change their life through music. But many can't because of who they are, where they come from, their background, or the barriers that are faced in the industry. So we're really here to sort of equalise and provide equitable opportunities for people to access music making or learning or earning. And what we do predominantly is fund organisations that run programmes for musicians. So we do that all across England. And then we also have a fund that's specifically for 18 to 25-year-olds or up to 30 if you identify as deaf or disabled, which is for your creative project and idea. So we're doing a lot of different things, but as Westley said, I'm sure we'll whistle-stop tour through everything that we do over the course of this.
Thank you for sharing that, especially knowing that the two of you have worked together before. Because I asked that question because I am curious, how does one end up in the funding industry in the music
By
business?
accident.
Yeah, mostly
I
by
guess
accident.
that's the answer.
Yeah, I
and
just
I
sort of
ask
fell
this
into
to
it.
everybody, to every guest that we have. And it's really interesting to see, first of all, how do people end up where they are, why they do that, and what they're passionate about. Because one of the things that we want to emphasize here is the different career paths you can go into in the music industry. And I feel like sometimes people don't quite realize this is the type of work that maybe could inspire you. You could do that. This could be your career. As far as youth music goes, because you just talked about something that I want to touch upon, which is the education bit. For both of you, how much of your work is actually educating people that these funds exist, these grants are available to them? And what is it that you do to raise awareness on that and help people actually get access to the funds?
I mean, I guess things like this are a big part of our job. So I forgot to say I'm a grants and learning officer at Youth Music, and I'm responsible for the Next Gen Fund and for our organisations that are funded in Wales. But doing outreach and doing events like this where we're really trying to decode and demystify what it is that we do is a really big part of being in funding, because I think you can read a lot of guidance on websites and there's a lot of guidance out there. And number one, it is really important to read the guidance, but also sort of trying to make it so that we're humans too. We're in this industry because we're passionate about supporting people in their next steps and their progression. The other thing that I think quite a lot of funding organisations are trying to do as much as possible is make it as accessible as possible to apply. So for our Next Gen Fund, which is for individuals, we're aware that sometimes it's easier to express yourself and your creative idea not through a written bio or a written project plan, but actually through audio application or through video applications, or uploading something alongside your application like an EPK, electronic press kit, or I knew you were going to ask me, or a sort of a visualization of your creativity, because sometimes it can be really difficult to get that across in writing. So we're trying to and I think we're all in the funding landscape adapting, and we don't always have it right, and we will probably hold our hands up and say we don't always have it right, but we're trying to learn and trying to make it more accessible.
Yeah, so we're a national funder and a small team, so there's only 6 of us in the grants team, and we fund all regions of the UK. So getting out and getting into the space where people are making music or people going to see music and being present in those places is really, really important. So we're not like an ivory tower in London that no one can penetrate because you're not from there. It's really important to go out and speak to people. So yeah, things like this are the most important for us, I think. And we're actually trying to build in more time to do more of this sort of thing as well. Yeah, it makes a big difference.
I think the other thing is we aim as much as possible, as Westley says, within capacity to be approachable. So I know at the PRS Foundation, we'll reply to every email that you send to the generic inbox, and so will we at Youth Music. So, trying to let people know that isn't just a generic info at or grants at email address. We look at it every day. If you have a question, drop us an email and ask. And one thing we're trying to do a lot more of is with our Next Gen Fund, we run bookable one-to-one sessions before the funding deadline so that you can call up and chat to us about your idea and tell us what you're thinking about, and we can try and provide as much advice as possible. Obviously, within the limits of what's feasible for the team, but trying.
Well, you've mentioned the Next Gen Fund, which is what you're predominantly working on. Westley counted a few incredible initiatives that I've been recommending to people, and absolutely always. And also, you mentioned Women in Music Fund, which is not just for women; it's also for non-binary music makers. Am I correct? Thank you. But for you, according to my research, you have Youth Music Trailblazer Fund, you have the Music Catalyzer Fund, you have the Music Incubator Fund. Is there any other project that you'd like to sort of explain and talk about?
Well, I think for people in this room, like Youth Music Incubator Fund is, so both all of Trailblazer, Catalyzer and Incubator Fund are for organisations. So Trailblazer is up to £30,000 for an organisation to run a programme that they're testing out or they're trialling a new way of working with children and young people to get into music. Catalyzer is a lot more about sustaining or scaling up an existing programme of work, and that's £30,000 to £300,000. An Incubator Fund is about providing real, paid, meaningful work opportunities for people who are facing barriers to like real employment in the industry that are all paid at the real living wage. So organisations apply to us to run a programme where they will incubate young people, whether that's at a record label, learning how to be a music leader, at a radio station, and that will come through Youth Music, and everything will be advertised through the Youth Music Jobs Board as well. So even if you're not applying to the Next Gen Fund, opportunities for real paid employment come through the Incubator Fund. And the other thing that we do is within our Next Gen community, which is sort of the big picture for sort of 18 to 25-year-olds that we work with, we also offer paid opportunities through the work that Youth Music does for those people. So every year we run an award ceremony called the Youth Music Awards, and we will hire 18 to 25-year-olds at the real living wage to work as like event runners, videographers, PR. So we offer opportunities just outside of the sort of funding programs as well.
There's a great variety of funds, as you greatly just explained. Is Youth Music independent? Is it Arts Council associated? Is it just business to business? Or do you, because you also have grants for individuals, how did those different concepts differ?
Yep, so Trailblazer, Catalyzer and Incubator are all for legally constituted organisations. Next Gen Fund is for individuals, so it's very much focused on you as an individual and your creative project. So, for example, a band isn't a sort of right fit for Next Gen because we're interested in the individual. In terms of the way that youth music is funded, so for Catalyzer and Trailblazer, we're funded by the National Lottery funds through the Arts Council, but we also work in partnership with the People's Postcode Lottery and TikTok and Turtle Bay on the Next Gen Fund and Incubator.
What is the People's Postcode Lottery?
I mean, I don't know if I can define that properly, really. You'll probably seen it advertised where they go around and they knock on the doors with the big checks. It's similar to the National Lottery, but it works in a slightly different way. And I don't know the ins and outs of how you win the People's Postcode Lottery. I don't have any extra odds that I can offer for winning the People's Postcode Lottery. Unfortunately, I did ask when I started.
No worries. Well, I'll go back to Westley then for 1 second. You did describe the different funds, Westley, and you did talk about what predominantly they focus on. Can you sort of explain a bit more in depth what the different grants are available to music makers, and also how is PRSF different than the PRS?
Great question. So we've got quite a lot of different grant schemes. I think if you were to look at our website, hands up, it's a bit of a mess. It's quite hard to navigate. We're trying to tidy that up for next year. I hope that will be clearer. So I think first off, if you are interested in funding, it's probably a good idea just to get in touch if you're not sure, and we can point you in the right direction. But generally we split our schemes our grants into two main categories: organisations and individuals. We only really have two schemes for organisations, or 2.5. One's called the Talent Development Partner Network. We fund lots of organisations on a yearly basis. People like Roundhouse are on that. And then we have a fund for organisations. If you're doing any sort of talent development showcases, working with people trying to help them, you can apply for that. That's up to £10,000. But most of what we do, and actually even the organisation funding that we give, is about funding individual music creators. We don't really fund the core costs of running an organisation. We just fund the project costs of working with musicians, i.e. paying musicians. So most of our funds are individual funds. We have the open fund, which is the place you should probably start. And that's for anything to do with recording or going on tour, anything to do with the creation or performance of new music. And then you would potentially go up to, if you're in the classical world, our Composers Fund, which is only for composers and classical music, maybe some sound art, that sort of stuff. And we have the PPL Momentum Fund, which is for what we call when you're at your tipping point, which means the program, what that essentially means is it's kind of hard and vague to define, depends on what genre you are, what part of the country you live in, and all different sort of thing. But basically it means the project you're applying for is really going to tip you over the edge and make you become a successful long-term career in music. You don't need to come back to us for funding again. So if you do get that, you can't actually go back down to the open fund. You've got to the top of that. And then we have a fund called the Hitmaker Fund, which is only for producers and behind-the-scenes songwriters. So if you're a top-line writer or if you just make music for other people, as long as you're part of the creative process, you can apply for that. And that is also the fund that can have the most equipment. Generally, we don't fund equipment. And then we have our International Showcase Fund, which is considered the next level above that, but actually for some genres that can come before even the open fund. Like, so I'm a metaler personally, and metal, the audience in Europe is massive for that, and most metal bands in the UK do well in Europe before they do well in England. So you can always come into that at any time, really. And that's kind of the main stepping stones of how our grants work. There are lots of other little ones that exist side by side as well, but yeah, I would say the best thing to do is just get in touch or have a chat afterwards.
And do you need to be a PRS member to
no, you don't need to be a PRS member. So PRS Foundation is an independent charity, and PRS for Music is our main donor. And part of that donation is we get office space. So we're in the PRS for Music office just around the corner.
So you're two separate entities.
Yeah, so we're two separate entities. And I think basically, from my understanding, I think that happened because back in the day, PRS would just give people money, and then they realised that's probably not fair, and there's lots of favouritism involved. So they set up a completely independent charity to deal with that in a proper way. And since then, that's grown and grown and grown, and we have lots of. So the Momentum Fund is funded primarily by PPL as well. So they're the main funder of that, and our Talent Development Partner Network. And so we have lots of private funding from people like Spotify, YouTube, and Beggars Group. And then we have Arts Council as well, and all the national arts councils, Creative Scotland, and Arts Council Northern Ireland, all that sort of stuff. So there's lots of money from lots of different organisations for specific schemes for different reasons. It's really simple.
What would you say is your most popular grant that's most applied
the PPL Momentum Fund is I think the most. Well, it's not the most in-demand grant, but it's the one most people want because it seems like that's the one where you get successful. But the fund is important and it does help people, but it's the opportunity that you're applying for that is the reason you would be successful, and you've got to get to that point first. So I think the open fund is the one most people should be looking at to get to that point, really. The open fund is the most in-demand grant scheme, for sure.
And one for both of you. Because I know the application process, and people come to me asking for advice, especially emerging talent who really want to get their first project off the ground, or they don't have that much experience. But a lot of these funds are also built for people who have done some work. They have had some revenue in music already. And actually, a lot of funds would require you to have 25% of the budget already. So you wouldn't be covered for the whole thing, if I'm not mistaken. So would you say that in order to get funding like this, do you already need to be successful?
Not for the Next Gen Fund. So the Next Gen Fund was specifically set up to support those people that might not be at the stage to receive funding like PRS Foundation. So for Next Gen, we don't have any requirement for match funding. So it's for those that are facing a financial barrier to deliver this project. We don't need match funding through that. And we're wanting to support early stage talent and hopefully enable them to then go on and get PRS Foundation funding afterwards. But it's specifically for those early career people that are perhaps a bit too early for other funders. So for us, no. We want you to support you at the early stage of your career. We often get asked the question like, oh, I've got really low streaming numbers, or oh, I've got really low social numbers, or I haven't actually released any music yet. And for us, that's fine. We need to know that you're passionate and you're creative and you're doing bits, but send us a demo of what you want to put out. And even if it's like you're coming in for recording costs, send us the demo so we can listen to that and see that you're making the music. You don't have to have released it yet, and it's about the project and you. So for us, no.
Brilliant.
For us, it depends on the scheme. If it's a next level scheme, then yeah, you do need some money, and we'll probably be looking at other. If you're coming to us to make a record, we want the record label to be putting money in as well, that sort of thing. But for our earlier schemes, that gets less. We can't 100% fund a project, so you do need to put some of your own money in. That can be projected costs. So if you're going on tour, you can say, oh, I think I'm going to make this much money on this tour, and that can be your income as well. But you need to have something else coming in to show that it's a viable project.
I guess it could be merch revenue. It could be
anything
even
like
crowdfunding.
That. Totally. And other grant schemes as well you can include in your application to us. The only thing with most of our grant schemes is you do need to have an 18-month track record of making music. So if it's like, I'm sure there's no one here is in this position, but I've never made anything before. Can I have $5,000 to have a go? That's not going to work. But if you have to provide usually two musical examples of what you've done, and then the plan of what you want to do. So you don't necessarily need to be successful. You just need to have been active as a musician for 18 months. And across the schemes, when you apply to us, when we get a batch of applications to look at, we're not necessarily comparing them with each other. We're comparing where you are now, what the project you're asking to do is, and where you will be when you're done. And if this is clearly going to push this person, then you have as much chance of getting it as anyone else.
Okay, well, let's talk about accessibility, because you mentioned, Asia, that your fund is actually quite accessible and you don't need to have had that much experience or that much support before from the industry to be able to be eligible. What would you say are the biggest sort of entry barriers for you young professionals out there right now, and what are the biggest challenges for musicians?
Well, I think we're all kind of aware of what's going on politically within the UK at the moment. And so financial barrier is massive for, I think, a lot of young people. I think, the industry itself also puts up lots of barriers, whether through not showing roles or a lack of transparency, but also through, as Wesley sort of mentioned, the regionality. Like, there is a lot of the industry centered in London, and so access to opportunities can be a barrier as well. If you've not had access to a music making opportunity when you're younger, would you then progress to something which is more talent development in an organization? And would you then think that that's a viable career option? But I think one of the things that we see quite a lot as well is the pandemic has also had a really big effect on particularly young people's careers and put them on hold a little bit, with like a lack of live opportunities, a lack of collaboration opportunities, a lack of networking opportunities. So, there are so many barriers being faced, but those are a few that, I think are really important at the moment, particularly.
How about you, Westley?
You mean how accessible is funding now, or?
Yeah, and what are the biggest challenges that young music makers or emerging music makers are facing?
Definitely mirror what Asia just said completely. And I think just a lot of, particularly in the funding world, actually kind of like it historically hasn't reached particular groups of people, and it's going to take a long time to change that. I think it's not going to be a very easy fix, and until there are more people of different backgrounds in decision-making positions at organisations, it's not going to change at all. Mm-hmm. So it's with something like Power Up, which is specifically to tackle anti-black racism, that is completely black-led and black-run, and that's kind of important that it is led in that way. And I think, that will, all the professional people that are part of that scheme will go on to work in different organisations and have decision-making powers there, and that will make any kind of processes that people build for funding just reach more people and make sense for more different groups of people, rather than people having to come and, you've got to work this way for me. Like, I'm the administrator. It should be easy for an artist to ask me for money. I'm the one that has to do the work. I think that's the way it should be, but it seems it's the other way around and has been for a long time. So I think that is changing, but I just think it's going to take a little while.
I agree. And the three of us have spoken about the importance of grassroots projects and, getting involved with communities and actually doing groundwork earlier. Looking back at the charity industry in music, we've always had partnerships with charities and causes. The music industry has always been charitable. You have artists endorsing charities and organizations. Sometimes they do those things themselves and they take the initiative to actually fundraise for certain causes. In the past, we've seen Live Aid and Band-Aid happen, but things have changed quite a bit, in my opinion, because I feel like some of those projects, if they were to happen today, they'd be quite tone deaf. So how do you think the charities and funding industry have changed over the years?
Well, what I was just saying before, I think, is more just better representation, trying to understand different groups of people rather than sort of speaking at them. And I think, that just makes everything better for everybody. I think it's always been sort of my way or the highway, rather than being more encompassing for everybody. And more. I don't like the word empowering that much. I find it quite annoying. But putting the power in the individual, whoever is applying to you, what they're asking for is important to them. So you have to take it seriously. That sort of thing. I think
and
it's
what's the way forward? Do you think that's the future?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, more of an individual focus and more open to different kinds of thinking, different kinds of backgrounds, different types of people, and that there isn't one bar of this is good or this is success. What success looks different to very different people. Like, I'm not interested in. I've got to be careful. I don't say something about something I shouldn't. Like particular massive festivals. Say I don't care about that, but for someone that's their goal. Like, I would never go there. But then someone else might think they're playing in a pub in some town nowhere. But that's their idea of success. And if they can make that work for them and make money, and you can do that, then that's great. And we should be open to all of that stuff, all sorts of different ways of working.
Absolutely. Asia?
And I think it's also about, and I think Wesley, you were talking about this as well, about transparency in decision making and also bringing lived experience into the decision making process, that we're not funders that sit separately and pass judgment. So like youth music, because obviously we work with children and young people, one of the biggest things that we're advocating for is youth voice. So every organisation that applies to us has to have an element of consultation with young people in their programme design. You need to be going and asking young people, what is it that they want? How does it work for them? Halfway through the programme, how are you enjoying it? How are you reflecting on it? And bringing the lived experience of both the participants into how programs are structured, and then also into the decision-making process. So we're in the process of bringing, more young voices into our decision-making, because those are our beneficiaries. Those are who is being impacted. That's who the work's for. And I think that is a really important thing that a lot of funders are moving towards is transparency in their decision-making process and bringing multiple voices to the table, and the people who are, as Wesley said, if it's your project and you care about it, that's important to you, and how we bring that into the decisions.
Can you repeat the age interval you would need to be in to be eligible for youth music funding?
So if you were applying to the Next Gen Fund as an individual, you'd need to be 18 to 25 or up to 30 if you identify as deaf or disabled, because we recognise there are additional barriers being faced by those groups to access the industry. For organisations, obviously, it's a completely different situation. And I should also clarify, I said you didn't need match funding for youth music earlier. That's for the Next Gen Fund. For organisations, you do need match funding. But for organisations that we support, they can be running programmes for 0 all the way up to 25.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I'm curious about, I guess, the process a little bit more, because you have mentioned, there's an option to do videos. I don't know if for your grants, it's mostly written or also videos.
Yeah, we have videos and audio too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are the different processes that are available for your funds?
For us, it's written, or you can submit a video. It's not going to be assessed on how well produced it is. It could just be you talking into your phone. It doesn't matter. And also, if you're uncomfortable on a video, you can just talk like a voice note. But you always have to answer the same questions. That's the key. And you have a time limit in your video. And then just as long as you can get your point across of what you want to do, that's fine.
Yeah, very similar for us for next gen. So it's audio, video, or written application. And then there are a couple of elements where you can choose to add additional uploads. So we always ask for an image of you, like an artist's image. And that's just if you're successful, it saves us chasing you at the end to announce it for like an announcement day. But you can also upload a visualization of your project timeline alongside the application, or we have audio, video, written, and written can either be filling out the questions in the form, or you can upload a document that answers the same questions with the same word count, which is kind of an opportunity for you if you'd like to. Obviously, as Wesley said, like we're not going to be judging you on like quality of your video, but it can be you can present it in a slightly different way rather than just filling out the word box.
It's nice to see some different creative methods emerging in the application process. Would you say that your application process is easy or is it difficult? Do you feel like artists can do them themselves, or do they need a team around them, or do they need to get advice from a lawyer or a music professional?
I mean, from our side, we're trying as much as possible to make it as easy as possible. And I would always recommend you write your application yourself, because it's your project and you as an artist. And actually it's a really beneficial thing to do, is to like sit down, take the time and think, okay, what is it that I want to do? How am I going to do it? Who am I going to work with? When am I going to get it done? And what do I think the impact's going to be for me and my next step? So I think it's almost like writing a business plan of like, I want to do this. I'm applying for funding, I'm applying for investment. And I think it's really good to take that time yourself and think that through. Because I think even if you're unsuccessful with the application, it's a really strong idea and a good way of thinking about what am I going to do in my next 6 months, my next 12 months as an artist? Where do I want to be? So that would be my advice.
I think our forms are fairly straightforward. That I think amongst many funders, they're probably much shorter. But we're still trying to refine that and make it easier and easier and easier. And it's for next year, we're actually changing our forms again for most of our schemes in order to make them more straightforward. And I think funding in general is often quite academic, needlessly so, I think. And we're trying to get rid of all of that. Like there's no jargon, no crazy words, like vague questions that don't really mean anything. Like try and be really straightforward about what we're asking you. And your answers can be as concise as that as well. We're not looking for essays or like what you might put in a press release to try and sell yourself. Like as Asia said, it's a business plan, really. You can bullet point it. So I'm doing X, Y, and Z. This is why. And this is what's going to happen. Here's my budget. Done. And like, here's the money. Great. Yeah, so just trying to make it as simple and as easy as possible. It's just that whole thing of like, I'm the administrator. I should deal with the burden of that. An artist should just be able to, as long as you can get across your point easily, what's the problem there? Why does it have to be so hard?
But I would say it is always good, as Wesley said, like bullet point it, make it really clear, make it really concise, and then get someone else to read it. Someone who doesn't know what you're doing, someone who doesn't know what you're applying for, doesn't have to be an expert. It's great if they have some understanding, but get someone else to read it and just be like, am I clear? Am I explaining myself well? Is it obvious what I want and why I want to do it and how I'm going to do it? Because I think that can really help just getting an external eye on it, because they'll pick up things that you won't have seen. So I always think that's quite a good thing to get to do.
And that's great that you're both trying to make the process as easy as possible. But one thing I'm encountering a lot is artists coming to me and saying, these funding applications are too complicated. I don't have time to do them myself. I don't have any experience, haven't done them before. And I mean, having done Arts Council applications myself for much larger projects, I know that sometimes it could be a full-time job, trying to get those documents sorted. So do you have any support for artists or applicants who need actual help writing the applications and applying? Or if not, can you recommend any resources or other organizations out there who might be providing that support?
So, like I said before, for the Next Gen Fund, we offer bookable one-to-one slots where you can come and just have a conversation with us about your idea, about what you're thinking about applying for. Obviously, like the difficulty with the role of a funder is we can't tell you what to apply for. We can't tell you, there isn't a magical tick thing, which is like, if you put this and this and this and this, you'll get funding. Unfortunately, that's not how it works, but we can try as much as possible to ask probing questions, to sort of give advice, to steer you to different resources. The other thing that we offer at Youth Music, and we do this across Next Gen Fund and our other organisational funds, is if you need support with, for access reasons, with like actually submitting your application, we have a separate fund, which is our access fund, that you can apply for in advance of submitting an application for any sort of cost associated with putting that application in.
We don't have any pre-application writing support. We do have an access pot, but that's for project-related costs. So if you need extra support to do the project, that doesn't come out of the overall budget, so you're not penalised for that reason. You don't get less than everybody else. We offer feedback if you are unsuccessful. We find that's really helpful, so you can find out what the panel thought, how you can make a stronger application, and then you can try again next time with that knowledge. And that's because our funding is so specific to the individual, it's quite hard to give broad ideas about what you should and shouldn't do. It's all about you. So getting that specific feedback after you've been declined is probably better, and it's frustrating for people to not get it, but I wouldn't take it personally because so many people are rejected. It's just get back and try again, and you will be, take that feedback and you will get there. But the point is, if you keep going, you don't give up, it will happen. But I think with the like pre-application help, kind of goes back to what I was just saying before, that I feel like if it is such a problem for someone that they need help to do it, then that's our problem, and we need to sort that out. It should be accessible, So
we should be giving you feedback.
So exactly, and that feedback goes both ways. If we do speak to people, we want to hear, well, how did you struggle with that? Why did that not make sense? And then we learn from that and make the forms better for the next year, and it's a constant evolving thing.
I mean, as sad as it sounds, I always have to tell people, you just gotta get back out there and apply again and again. It's always a no until somebody says yes, and that's the only thing that
my
matters.
most frustrating thing, I think, is that an application comes in and it's incredible. That music is amazing, but something is wrong with it and it didn't get funded, and they never come back. So if you just fix that, it's so good. So yeah, don't ever give up. I think with funding, it is hit and miss. We don't have enough money to fund everyone, so you just got to keep going.
Do you two have any active funds right now, by the way, in terms of applications? Because I know some of them are closed, but some of them are ongoing. Which ones are your active ones?
Only active fund for us right now is the International Showcase Fund, which is just always rolling, and because South by Southwest is coming up, so everyone's applying for that. Mm-hmm. But we'll be announcing all of next year's deadlines, I think, towards the end of December, and then you can kind of plan something should line up with your project, and then you can go for that. So if you sign up to our newsletters and our social media and all that sort of stuff, that's where we announce that.
Nice, that's a good tip.
We're reopening the Next Gen Fund on Monday for a January 16th deadline at 5 p.m. So that will be opening on Monday. And our next rounds for Trailblazer, Catalyzer and Incubator Fund are on the website as well, I think. And we'll regularly update our sort of funding deadlines and things like that.
Okay, but those aren't your favorite because you're not working on them.
Well, I love them. I think they're brilliant. I see incredible work through them. Like, it's fantastic. But because Next Gen is my little project.
Fair enough. And we have heard a lot about your projects, and let's not be biased here. I want to ask you if you think that there are other great resources and funds out there for emerging talent specifically. What would you say, except for your own organizations, are the ones that are making the most impact?
We'll help musicians. I think when you apply to us, when you get a portion of the money up front, and then you get the final amount at the end when you're giving us an evaluation. And in that evaluation, we always ask questions like, what more support do you need? What other help do you need? How can we help? And 9 times out of 10, it's about mental health support. And obviously that's what help musicians do. So we don't do that because that's what they do. And it's a real skill, and it's a difficult job to do. You can't just do it because people ask you to do it, and they have the infrastructure to deal with that. So I think that's a really, really, really important resource.
I was going to say exactly the same thing.
That's why I went first.
But I think also other funding, I really like the Developing Your Creative Practice Fund through the Arts Council, because it is about experimenting and trying out new art forms and testing out. You don't have to, your identity as an artist doesn't have to be fixed all the time. You don't have to decide who you are at 18 and that's who you are. So I really like that as a fund, just to sort of something slightly different.
And there's such a variety of different funds and different charities out there. And now that we're on the general charity sector topic, and I know that activism is something that's so important in the music business. You know, it usually goes hand to hand a lot of the time. So many different music organizations also support causes, as I said before. I like the climate change activism that's happening in the industry, for example. And I think a lot of great stuff is happening around that and raising awareness around that. What would you say are the most important causes we should get behind in the music industry in 2022 or 2023? Did it
Most
again.
important causes, that's a tough one. I think the kind of the disparity between support for different genres is a big problem for me, especially someone who's a metaler, where metal makes so much money, such massive crowds, such massive audiences for that music, but 20 years ago, 10 years ago, you'd never get a grant for that because people are like, what is this? Not funding that, stupid. And there are loads of different genres who are sort of still in that space, I think, where they're not treated on par. So it's not so much activism, but I think it's really important that we do a lot to sort of level that playing field and not be so, I guess, snobbish about different types of music and what is excellent, what is not excellent, what's worth supporting and what's not. That's something that is really important to me, and I try and bring that into my work every day when I'm looking at stuff, making sure that things aren't forgotten about because they're not cool or not the in thing at the moment.
Genre discrimination.
Yeah. Genre discrimination.
Okay.
I think, I mean, aside from the climate crisis, I think a big thing for me that I feel quite passionately about is the safety and support and development of these sustainable careers where lots of people are working portfolio careers as freelancers and don't necessarily have the same employment rights as those that are employed by big companies. And I think the financial instability that's happening at the moment with the cost of living crisis, the way that, you know, there were slightly different packages available through the pandemic for those that were employed and those that were freelance. I think the music industry has a high proportion of people that work in it who are freelance, and we should be thinking more and doing more about the rights of the freelance worker, for me. That's my personal opinion. I was reading about it today, but I think that's something that I care quite a lot about.
I agree, especially during the pandemic. I feel like the freelance workers suffered the most because a lot of the grants that were available to artists or music companies weren't available to freelancers. I mean, stage crew on tours especially, and, you know, we had to do some more DIY action to help them. Well, I am gonna get some questions from the audience in a minute, but before that, I just want to ask a quick few questions. First of all, exactly, what makes a really good funding application?
A really clear vision and a clear goal.
So detail, be specific. Like when you say, I'm recording an album, who with, where, how much is it going to cost? That sort of stuff. Just be very specific. That goes back to what Asia was saying about getting someone else to read it. They'll often ask a question when you've written something about, well, what is that? Who's doing that? And then you can fill that in. Because if an assessor can ask that question, they will ask that question. And then that's a reason not to support it. So the more detail, the better.
Okay. How long would a funding application process typically be from starting to actually receiving the money?
So usually our funds are open for about 4 weeks, and it's about the same for the foundation, give or take. We then, for organisational funding, the process takes a little bit longer and has a variety of different sort of timelines. But for next-gen individuals funding, you'd know the outcome of your application within 6 to 8 weeks. There's then a process of signing your funding agreement, coming to an introduction session where you get to meet everyone else who's been funded, and we explain the terms and conditions of the funding agreement and how it works. And then we need you to complete your project within 12 months of that. So, and then you'd evaluate at the end. Mm-hmm. But organisation's different.
Yeah, basically the same, but 8 to 10 weeks for us. Basically. And a really important aspect of that is that decision date after 10 weeks is when your activity has to start. Anything before that, we can't fund retrospectively. So you have to make sure when you're doing an application, you know when that decision date is, and all of your dates in that activity plan have to come after that.
Okay, next one. You are in quite rewarding industries. I mean, I feel like you have the power and the opportunity to give people opportunity and help people with resources. What has been the most inspiring moment in your career so far? Could be projects you worked on, could be connecting with an individual, could be helping an artist and seeing them grow, anything.
So when I was at the Albany, we worked with an artist called Tawia, and they were doing an album launch they were working with the Albany on. And in the event production team, we were offering a lot of in-kind support in terms of there was a really beautiful creative vision. It was a 360 individual podiums for the whole band. There was a whole artistic vision. And what we helped with both there was through the sort of event production, in-kind support of like, how do you build this? How do you develop it? But myself and my colleague Rachel at the Albany also helped her submit a funding application to the PRS Foundation for this album launch and her subsequent tour with Michael Kiwanuka. So I went, did the event, loved it. Most amazing gig I've ever been in. It was fantastic. Left the Albany, went to the PRS Foundation, where her project was still ongoing because it was with Michael Kiwanuka and for the subsequent tour. So I got to see both sides of that. I got to see that from working with Tawia on the vision and the idea and with her partner on the visuals and the whole sort of installation creation, to then coming back to it as a funder on the other side and reading the evaluation of the project that you were involved in and how it helped change their career. So that was it was sort of perfectly timed to have this sort of double vision. But it was just a really nice thing to feel like when you have an impact, and you do obviously have an impact, but it was just lovely to have the duality.
That's quite special.
Yeah, I think generally similar, like across the board, can kind of see that we are making quite a difference in many places, and that is always nice when you see that. But for me personally, I think we've funded recently an organisation called Capsule, which ran a thing called Supersonic Festival in Birmingham, which is like sort of straddles between kind of sort of experimental grime, garage, and metal, and all sorts of odd music in between. And it's exactly the kind of thing that I love, and I think back in the day would never have got that kind of support. And so getting to fund that, go to it and see people like there's a guy called The Bug playing with Flowdown and Manga, who are incredible, and then lots of amazing UK artists that we funded as individuals as well, now playing this festival that we've also funded. Kind of like, okay, we're making a big difference here. So that sort of stuff is good.
Both incredible stories. Okay, well, final one before the Q&A, which is, what are your best tips and advice to new and emerging music professionals / entrepreneurs who want to launch their first project?
There's so much information out there online. Some of it good, some of it bad. It's good to kind of, you're lucky to be here if you've come to any of the other things that you've done here. Coming out, I think, speaking to people and understanding that music industry, although I'm someone who is very skeptical of it and always has been, it's really just people. Some people aren't nice, some people are. If you go and meet them and talk to them, you can sort of engage with people and understand more about how that works and who does what. And that really, I think, makes a massive difference when you start taking that step. And then suddenly you'll find out you're in it and you know different people. If you think, I need to do this, that person does that, I'll ask them. And then things start coming together. So try not to do everything on your own and just speaking to people and coming to things like this. There's loads of events like this all over London. You can go and talk to someone and just, you'll figure it all out just by doing that, I think.
Couldn't agree more.
And I think I was going to say, use your network, use the people that you know, and build the base around you when you're sort of working on a project, because ideas can come from the strangest of places. And actually thinking a little bit outside of the box, being entrepreneurial, particularly the way that like income is now generated in the music industry has changed so much, and there are so many different ways. You know, you can do a Patreon, you can do your Bandcamp Fridays, you can, you know, all of these different methods and thinking out. And, you know, there was someone recently who was talking about, you know, doing their own subscription model and that then being their mailing list and monetizing things like that, and thinking outside the box and using the connections that you have, because you're gonna have loads of brilliant connections and they're there to sort of help you trigger your ideas, I think. And then the other thing I would think through is try and, as much as possible, use those to upskill yourself, because it's brilliant to work with other people and it's brilliant to sort of develop those connections. But also, if you're, for example, giving loads of cash over to someone to do something for you, is it not better to invest in you and learn how you can do that, how you can, you know, use Photoshop to create your own artwork or edit your own video or do your own sound capture? Like, that's, you know, think how much you can DIY, and then when you need to, then reach out to those people, if that makes sense. Was that a bit of a completely logic loop there?
No, it was good, but that makes me want to ask also, I mean, can you actually do networking while you're applying for a fund? Because I'm sure your processes are quite transparent, but would it help to try and go network with the people in the panel who might be looking over your application? Is that a thing, or is that frowned upon, or does it make them remember them more?
So our panels always rotate. It's never the same people for that reason. So people can't be lobbied, or someone can't even say, I'll give you a bit of money if you get me more money, that sort of stuff. So it's always different people for that reason. And then when you apply to us, actually, it might be good to mention your application straight away is scored by two people, one person who works at the foundation and one person who works specifically in whatever genre or world you're from. So they'll know what you're talking about, so you can be very specific in your applications. And then from there, it goes to a panel of 4 people who then decide doesn't get funded. But the process is transparent, but you don't know who the people are.
Okay. The other thing is, if there are any conflicts at any point, you know, those have to be declared and those people aren't decision making. So if someone on your team happens to be on a panel, they would not be allowed to be on that panel.
Okay, well, that's it from me. I think we've covered everything I wanted to know about. And now it's question time, people. You know how it goes. Ooh, so many questions.
Hi, guys. Like, I'm an artist manager. For an artist manager, what funds do you guys actually have? Like, in terms of, it could be for developing new artists or like opening a studio, or I'm just...
So for us, our Next Gen Fund is both for performing artists, music creators, or for future industry professionals. So if you were at that very early stage, you're not established as a business yet, or you're not registered as a sole trader, and you want to sort of start up your business and you want to work with a couple of different artists to help them and help you therefore progress through their business, that's something you could apply to Next Gen for. When you're a little bit further on, for example, if you've established yourself as a management company, you've been registered on a company's house and things like that, then you could look at the other sort of funding options if you wanted to sort of give back to the community, or you wanted to work with sort of 16 to 18-year-olds who, for example, are facing barriers to accessing the industry. That could then go into one of our more organisational funds.
So for us, most of our funding is really artist focused, but as a manager looking after artists, you can apply on their behalf. So if you're sorting out the project, then you can apply to any of our funds for whatever artist you're working with. For Power Up, there is a whole side for professionals. You could apply as a manager for that. Also, we do have Momentum Accelerator funding, but that is for Liverpool and Wales only for professionals, and there's one in Yorkshire, but that's for creators only. There might be more of those popping up, which could be a thing. But also for our international showcase fund, so if one of your artists gets a chance to showcase internationally, there's an extra £1,000 for you as a manager to go with them, because it's really important that they have help on the ground, because artists aren't always the best networkers and they need someone who can do that for them while they just do their performance. So there is some support for managers, but generally it's more for you to apply on behalf of the artists you work with. Yeah.
You should look at the Music Managers Forum as well.
Yes, they have an incredible accelerator manager fund.
They just became an MPO, so they've got money now, so get in touch with them.
Next question. Oh God, how do I choose? Oh, you already have the mic. Fine.
Hi, you mentioned before that bands probably won't be eligible for funding, but what if you're a, say, 20-year-old singer-songwriter who's ready to start recording or touring, so you've made a band in which you might creatively collaborate with, say, the guitarist or the drummer, wouldn't you then be eligible for some kind of funding, even though you've formed a band?
Yeah, and I think particularly when people are in bands and looking to apply to the next gen, we always encourage them to come and have a conversation with us.
Yeah.
Because as you say, like as a solo performing artist who's looking to record or tour live, often you do need to build a band around you, and that would be something that we could talk about and support. But the predominant thing and why next gen isn't for bands or collectives is it's up to £2,500, and we want to support you as an individual and your development. Doesn't mean you can't collaborate with people on the project at all. But it's just that, you know, for bands, you're probably more suited to something like PRS Foundation or Help Musician funding. But very happy to have a conversation.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, all of ours are for bands and artists, so it's fine.
Great stuff. Next one.
Hey, hello. So I'm a young charity founder with main goal to build safe music eco-residence for Ukrainians, because I'm from Ukraine. So I want to ask advice with such project where I can apply.
Are they for Ukrainians based in the UK now?
So the project must be in Ukraine with knowledge bridge between UK and Ukraine into music and education.
Yeah. So for our organisations funding, it can only be for people based in the UK. Doesn't matter where they're from, just have to be based in the UK. And it has to be for, basically what we do is help people build a long-term sustainable career in music. So it's not so much for community outcomes, it's more about the benefit for the individual's career and creative development. From what you've just said, it sounds like maybe something you should get in touch with the British Council for, because they do a lot of like cross-cultural support, and that I think they'd probably be interested in something like that. But any music-based project you do here, you would be eligible for the cost of working with those musicians. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I was going to suggest the British Council as well, but it's similar for us. But again, you know, for us, it's about being very targeted at children and young people who are facing barriers here. But again, if you have a specific project idea that you want to talk through in more detail, very happy to have a conversation as well.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here.
Hi, good evening. I'm Steph, I'm a musician and engineer and producer, and I was interested in those very accessible help and grants for new coming artists. But I was hearing about age things, and I would like to do some projects for myself and for others with people with disabilities. And with mental health disabilities, sometimes there are cases where you get a diagnosis late in age. And for example, I got autism diagnosis at 47. And after the diagnosis, sometimes you get, distractions and everything to do your project finally and to take off and contribute to the arts and to other things. So is there anything available, or we are some category that falls in the cracks somehow?
I mean, if you're an organization, if you're set up as an organization, you could apply to our organizational funding. But the other thing that I would say is we work with loads of organizations as well that, will be recruiting music leaders for projects and things like that. And I can give you a link we have a map on our website of all of the organizations that we work with that you can have a look and see, like, what programs are they running as an organization? How can I get involved with them? I presume are you set up as an organization?
Not yet. It's my project for maybe next year, something. But also as an individual, for myself, but also helping other individuals.
Yeah.
I would like to work with people with the same condition, these sorts of things, and express themselves artistically. And some of them are people who got the diagnosis very late and would like to have an opportunity, to express themselves and contribute to music.
Yeah, so for our Trailblazer Fund, you do need to be legally constituted as an organisation on the day of the deadline. But as I said, it's very much about sort of testing or trialling out new ways of working. Like, you don't necessarily have an established programme. You haven't been running it for a couple of years, but you want to sort of test out new ways of providing children and young people who face barriers, of which autism can be one, to access music making opportunities. So maybe that's something a little bit further down the line to look at, you know, if you are looking to constitute as an organisation. And like, feel free to get in touch, you know, if that's the journey that you want to go on.
Thanks.
Yeah, no worries.
So for PRS Foundation, we don't have any kind of age limits, so you can apply to either the organisation's fund or the individual's fund. So organisation side for what you want to do working with others, and then the music creator side for your own work, and that would be fine. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Give it up for Asia and Westley.